Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into something you really didn't sign up for unless you enjoy trench foot, questionable spiritual advice, and the occasional rat kebab. You're about to join a crusade. It's the 11th century, your village priest is hyped up on holy fire, and before you can say bad idea, you're lacing up your best wooden sandals for a 2,000-mile walk into chaos. Picture this, the air reeks of sweat, livestock, and what can only be described as medieval despair. Trumpets wail as barefoot peasants, armored nobles, and everything in between shuffle through muddy roads in a kind of holy traffic jam. You clutch your rusty sword like it's a ticket to heaven, even though it's mostly a ticket to tetanus. And here's the kicker, you probably won't survive this. Not because of the enemy, mind you. No, it's the dysentery, starvation, infighting, and general lack of a plan that's going to get you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the local time in the comments, I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are 14 years old. Or maybe 30, it's hard to tell under that layer of soot and existential dread. You're from a small village, probably somewhere in France or the Holy Roman Empire, and the biggest decision you made before this was how to split a turnip 4 ways for dinner. But now? Now you're part of something massive. The First Crusade. A holy war. You heard the Pope himself gave a fiery speech, said that sins could be erased if you signed up. Eternal salvation for just one moderately terrible road trip. At least, that's how it was pitched. What you didn't hear was that this whole thing started because Byzantine Emperor Alexios I asked the Pope for a little help fending off the Seljuk Turks. Pope Urban II, never one to miss a marketing opportunity, spun that into an all-out call for every Christian to go reclaim the Holy Land from infidels. Spoiler, most of the people in the Holy Land had no idea this was happening, or why. You're swept up in a crowd, farmers with pitchforks, knights with polished armor, entire families with crying toddlers and goats on leashes. The air is thick with incense, sweat, and the occasional misplaced enthusiasm. You can't help but feel like something big is happening. People chant Deus Vult. God wills it, as if those words can feed them or stop arrows. One fun fringe fact? Some people genuinely believe Jerusalem was just down the road. Like, a short hike away. A few even packed for a weekend. Historians still argue whether this mass confusion was due to poor education or straight-up blind faith, but either way, it's giving serious GPS not found energy. You don't question much. The sermons were loud, the promises louder. You were told you'd be a warrior of God, a liberator, maybe even a hero. What you didn't get was a battle plan. Or armor. Or a sense of how far the East really is. But here you are. You said goodbye to your mother, kissed a charm she slipped into your hand, and started walking. There's no turning back now. Mostly because your village has already been pillaged by the very group you're marching with. That's right, before you even left Europe, some of the less disciplined bands started robbing and burning their own Christian towns. Because, you know, looting builds team morale. Oh, and remember the part where sins would be forgiven? That little perk led to some creative interpretations. Like that time a bunch of crusaders decided to start with local Jewish communities, massacring entire neighborhoods on the way to the Holy Land. The logic? They're not Christian, so this counts. You don't know it yet, but these are the Rhineland massacres, a dark prelude to what's coming. The people around you are a mix of piety and panic. Some carry hand-drawn maps showing rivers that don't exist. Others lug relics they bought from suspicious monks, shards of the true cross, feathers from the Archangel Gabriel, or, in one case, a toenail said to belong to St. Peter. Fringe fact, medieval toenail relics were weirdly popular. Historians still argue whether some were actually animal claws polished to look holy. You're 2 days in and already questioning your life choices. Your feet are raw, your bread is molding, and that one guy who promised to teach you swordsmanship turns out to be a drunk blacksmith who once saw a sword fight. Still, the first few days have a kind of grim excitement. You're moving. You're part of something. You sing hymns, swap stories around a campfire, and keep reminding yourself this is for God. This is good. Right? Then the weather turns. Rain. Cold, unrelenting rain. The kind that soaks through everything, including your bones. Your cloak, woven lovingly by your grandmother, is now a sponge. You slip in the mud constantly, and your boots, if you're lucky enough to have any, begin to rot from the inside out. Welcome to your first lesson in medieval survival. Nothing stays dry, and everything chafes. Disease creeps in quietly. Someone in your group coughs for 3 straight days and then stops, forever. Another man's leg wound starts to smell like boiled onions. You pretend not to notice when people begin digging shallow graves at night. But the crusade keeps moving. You pass through villages that eye you with a mix of awe and terror. Some cheer. Some lock their doors. One town offers you bread, another throws rocks. You're not sure which reaction is more honest. Food becomes a guessing game. Some nights you eat hard cheese and dried meat, other nights it's just whatever you can boil in a pot, including roots, tree bark, and, once, a very questionable pigeon. One group roasted a rat over an open flame, claiming it tasted like divine rabbit. Spoiler, it didn't. The ranks thin. Some give up and turn back. Others disappear. No one talks about it. Maybe wolves. Maybe deserters. Maybe they found a better religion. You don't blame them. You try to stay optimistic. There's always that one guy in your group, the one who claims he saw a vision of angels hovering over Jerusalem. He swears you'll be there in a month. You want to believe him. But your aching legs and dwindling supplies say otherwise. Then comes the realization you're not special here. You're cannon fodder. The knights at the front ride horses and eat meat. You're lucky if you get broth made from mystery bones. They make decisions, you carry them out. Badly. You begin to suspect that heaven's gates may not be at the end of this road, but instead behind you, in your old cottage with its leaky roof and its entirely bearable lack of death. But it's too late now. The first real fight is still far off, and already your muscles burn, your stomach grumbles, and your soul wonders, was this truly a calling, or just an exceptionally well-marketed disaster? Either way, you keep walking. Because that's what everyone else is doing. And you're not ready, yet, to admit that this holy journey is starting to feel more like a divine prank. You wake up to the smell of mildew, cooked onions, and something unidentifiably sour. The sky's still that grayish blue that means dawn, or maybe just more clouds, and your blanket, if you can even call it that, has soaked up half the night's rain. You don't remember falling asleep. You just remember closing your eyes for a second and dreaming of dry socks. Welcome to camp life. It's not glamorous. In fact, it's barely survivable. Your tent is a sad excuse for shelter, 2 bent sticks, a canvas sheet riddled with holes, and a rope that somehow unknots itself every night. If you're lucky, it stays upright long enough for you to change into a drier version of your equally awful clothes. The mud squelches underfoot as you crawl out and blink at the chaos that is your new home. Hundreds, no, thousands, of people are packed together like pickled fish, except less sanitary. And the smell? Oh, the smell. Imagine if a livestock pen had a baby with a sewage drain and then was left out in the sun for 3 days. That's the aroma of Crusader base camp. It's the kind of scent that becomes a personality trait. You don't just smell bad, you are bad. The communal latrines are ditches dug just far enough from camp to be technically separate but close enough that the wind carries the memory of them back every time it shifts. You hold your breath and wonder why no one thought of placing them downwind. But then again, no one thought of water purification either, so maybe expecting a functioning sanitation plan is asking too much. And speaking of water, you now drink it with your eyes closed. Because if you look too closely, you'll see things floating. And if you smell it, you'll realize that fresh spring water is Crusader speak for filtered through a dead donkey. The daily routine is simple but draining. First, line up for your ration of bread or porridge. If you arrive too late, all that's left is the burned crust from the bottom of the pot. Then it's chores, hauling firewood, sharpening tools, scrubbing armor, or digging trenches. The latter is a crowd favorite because there's a decent chance you'll find something edible, or at least chewable, are buried in the dirt. By midday, the camp is a boiling pot of sweat, barking orders, and clanging metal. Knights argue about strategy, priests shout sermons from makeshift pulpits, and vendors pop up trying to sell you relics made from genuine Holy Land wood, carved from a log they found yesterday behind the latrines. The class divide becomes crystal clear here. You, peasant, soldier, cannon fodder, get stew, moldy bread, and a shared blanket. The nobles? Roasted meats, wine, silken pillows, and separate tents with actual wooden floors. You sneak glances at their feast fires, inhaling the smells of roasting fowl like it's incense from heaven. You think back to home, to the goat you never appreciated and the fireplace you now dream about like it's a lover. You give anything for that goat's company right now. Instead, you've got Gerard, the guy sleeping next to you who insists on singing war songs in his sleep and smells like regret. But don't worry, there's worse. Illness begins to circulate like a badly written script. First, it's a cough. Then someone develops a rash. Then, 3 tents down, a boy starts vomiting black bile. No one has a name for it, but you can tell by how quickly people start digging his grave that it's serious. Fun fringe fact, one treatment for illness in Crusader camps. Leeches. Yep, the go-to medical wisdom of the time was, you feel bad? Let's take some blood out. Historians still argue whether this was done more out of habit or genuine belief that it helped. Either way, you avoid the camp physician like he's handing out free death. The smell of rot clings to everything. You start to recognize it before you see the source. The dead are buried hastily, sometimes not at all. One morning, you find a man face down in the mud, stiff as a board. You tell someone. They nod. We'll get to it. 3 days later, he's still there, now part of the scenery. Camp becomes less of a place to rest and more of a giant waiting room for your next disaster. A downpour floods your tent. A cooking fire burns down half the provisions. A brawl breaks out over a stolen wine flask and ends with 2 men beaten unconscious and one mysterious goat that everyone agrees wasn't part of the original group. You try to keep your spirits up. There are songs, stories, even laughter. But it always feels a little forced. Like everyone's pretending that this isn't the worst place they've ever been. That the mud hasn't become a second skin. That the food hasn't started to taste like defeat. You miss your mother. You miss bread that doesn't crack your teeth. You miss quiet. The priests keep reminding you that this suffering is holy. Christ suffered too, they say. You nod, but silently wonder if Christ had to share a blanket with a man who snores like a dying pig and once mistook soap for cheese. At night, the howling starts. Not wolves, though those do make appearances, but people. Crying, praying, muttering in their sleep. One woman screams for her son who wandered out 2 days ago and never returned. The guards say it was bandits. Or deserters. Or worse. Sleep becomes a rare and precious thing. When it comes, it's broken, full of feverish dreams and the ever-present fear that you'll wake up with someone else's lice. Oh, right. Lice. Let's talk about that for a second. They're not just a nuisance, they're your new roommates. You scratch so much your skin bleeds. Your clothes move when you set them down. There are entire patches of scalp gone rogue. Some guys try boiling their tunics. Others just give up and go bald. You start to believe lice are part of God's plan, too, maybe a test of faith, or just a medieval feature nobody wants to talk about. Still, there are moments. One afternoon, you find a half-dry patch of grass and sit with your back against a rock. The sun filters through the clouds. A boy near you hums a lullaby. For a second, you forget where you are. You close your eyes, breathe, and pretend you're just on a long walk. Then someone steps in a pile of dung next to you and ruins the illusion. You're snapped back to reality when a messenger arrives. Orders. The camp is moving. Again. The next leg of the journey lies ahead, and nobody knows exactly where it leads. But the command is clear: pack up, march out, and keep the faith. So, you rise. You roll up your blanket, kick the mud off your boots, and shoulder your sack of regret. Because this is your life now. A parade of pain, mud, and slowly unraveling belief systems. The comforts of home are a myth. The idea of glory is fading fast. And the only thing you know for certain is that tomorrow probably smells worse. And you still haven't seen a single enemy. You march. Again. It's starting to feel like you were born marching, like your feet were always meant to be blistered and your back always meant to carry more than it should. The sun's no longer just hot, it's aggressive, like it's got something personal against your skin. You stopped sweating hours ago. That would have meant you had enough water to sweat. The road ahead twists through forest, meadow, and mountain pass, though you've stopped caring what the scenery looks like. Pretty, bleak, rainy, dry, it's all just another backdrop to hunger and dehydration. Your legs move on instinct. One step. Then another. And another. Until the thought of stopping feels just as impossible as continuing. But you do stop. Sometimes. Usually when someone collapses. You don't always know their names. You might have seen them at campfires, or maybe shared a hunk of cheese once, but there's no time for introductions out here. Someone drops, and the others either step around or stop to pray. Depends on whether they were popular or just a guy with loud sneezes. Either way, the march always resumes. You hit your first true border not long after, crossing into Byzantine lands. The change is subtle at first. Roads a little straighter. Town slightly more stone and less mud. Then, full-on dramatic. Walls. Towers. Greek script on signs. The locals give you looks. Not fearful ones. Not welcoming either. Just calculating. Like they're wondering how many of you will make it, and how many more will eat everything in sight first. See, the Byzantines technically invited you here. But only because they didn't expect tens of thousands of crusaders to show up unannounced like rowdy houseguests who brought their own bedbugs and body odor. Emperor Alexio's eye is both relieved and deeply alarmed. He offers some support, grain, guides, polite nods, but mostly wants you to move along. Fast. You learn to say a water in Greek. Sort of. You still butcher it. They laugh behind your back. Tensions rise quickly. Byzantine guards try to enforce order, but your fellow crusaders, as well, they're not exactly known for subtlety. A group of poorly disciplined warriors breaks into a granary. Another accidentally sets a church on fire. One guy insists he saw a miracle in a loaf of bread and starts a new sect on the spot. Historians still argue whether these early crusaders were naive, chaotic, or just desperately hungry. Somewhere near Nicaea, things get complicated. You run into the first organized Seljuk resistance. Not just scattered bandits or defensive skirmishes. No, this is a full-on, professional army. Horses, archers, actual tactics. And suddenly, you're reminded that this isn't just a road trip with occasional swordplay, this is war. The Seljuks are good. Fast. Mobile. And terrifyingly quiet when they want to be. Their arrows come before their footsteps. Their horses move like shadows. The Crusaders, by contrast, are loud, disorganized, and fueled by theological rage and undercooked stew. Your first battle is pure chaos. You barely know how to hold your sword correctly. You swing wildly, more out of panic than skill. Around you, men shout, clash, fall. Dust rises, screams echo, and someone singing a hymn that quickly turns into a scream when he loses a finger. Here's the thing no one told you about battle: it's not glorious. It's muddy, sweaty, deafening, and confusing. Your armor pinches in all the wrong places. Your helmet fogs up. You accidentally hit Gerard in the elbow, and he doesn't speak to you for a week. You survive, somehow. The knights call it a victory. You call it a brush with multiple infections. That night, the priests lead a Thanksgiving service. You mumble the words, but your heart isn't in it. You're too busy shaking, your hand still trembling from holding a blood-slick sword. One of the older soldiers pats your back and says, "You did well." You want to believe him. But you also want to go home and never touch a weapon again. The next day, more marching. More forests. More dehydration. And now, more fear. The mood has changed. You notice it in the way people sleep lighter. How conversations are quieter. How your fellow crusaders keep their hands on their weapons even while relieving themselves. You used to joke about the trip. Not anymore. But then, rumors of a siege. Not just a skirmish. A real city. Nicaea. It's held by the Seljuks and will be your first major target. You're told it's crucial to reclaim it, that God wills it. Honestly, you just want a place with walls and fewer wolves. Approaching the city, you're struck by how intact it looks. Tall stone defenses, banners fluttering in the breeze, defenders peeking from towers. And you? You're part of a swarm of half-starved, mostly untrained, perpetually irritated crusaders with exactly one siege weapon, a wheeled tower that broke 2 miles back and is currently being used as a latrine. Still, the leaders, the nobles, the strategists, the ones with functioning armor, make a plan. Sort of. Dig trenches. Build ladders. Block supplies. And wait. So you dig. And dig. And dig. It's hot, hard work, made worse by constant arrows flying down from the city walls. You lose count of how many times someone's nearly skewered while trying to move rocks. One guy gets impaled while relieving himself behind a bush. You stop using bushes after that. Supplies start running low again. Some crusaders fish from a nearby stream, pulling out tiny, sad-looking fish that taste like moss and regret. Others forage from nearby farms, which quickly escalates into raiding. Soon, Byzantine farmers are filing complaints faster than you can say diplomatic incident. To keep morale up, a priest organizes a daily prayer circle. It helps. A little. Until a lightning storm hits and his tent catches fire. Fringe tidbit, some thought it was divine punishment. Others said it was just bad canvas. Historians still argue. After weeks of this standoff, something unexpected happens. Nicaea surrenders. But not to you. To the Byzantines. That's right. While you were digging trenches, their negotiators were busy making a side deal. They took the city through diplomacy while you thought you were going to storm it. You don't get to loot. You don't get to liberate anything. You don't even get a proper nap inside the city. The Byzantine flags go up, the gates open for them, and you're told to move along. Some crusaders are furious. Others just shrug and keep walking. You? You feel cheated. Exhausted. Like someone promised you gold and glory but handed you a pamphlet and a moldy cracker instead. This is your first major lesson in Crusader politics. The alliances are shaky, the goals are murky, and you're just a pawn. A hungry, sore-footed, increasingly cynical pawn. Still, you march. Because that's what's expected. You shoulder your belongings, adjust the strap on your rusting helmet, and shuffle forward with the others, already dreaming of water, of food, of a bath that doesn't involve standing in the rain and crying quietly. The Holy Land is still hundreds of miles away. And you're starting to wonder what exactly you sign up for. Your feet are beginning to forget what not hurting feels like. With Nicaea behind you, and not in your hands, thank you very much, you're now part of a seemingly endless river of crusaders pouring deeper into Asia Minor. And you're no longer just marching, you're doing it under a sun that feels like it's trying to cook you from the scalp down. Your leather boots, stiff with dried sweat and layers of dust, slap against the ground with the sound of betrayal. You've lost at least 2 toenails and the other 8 have entered witness protection. And now the real test begins. You enter the Anatolian Plateau. If you've never been here, and let's be honest, you haven't, picture a rocky desert that occasionally remembers to be a grassy plain but only for a hot minute before going back to being a sun-blasted wasteland. There's no shade. No cities. No rivers that actually contain water. You start to see mirages. You know they're mirages because the shimmering oasis turns out to be a sun-bleached rock next to a goat skeleton. You begin to understand why Seljuk tactics work so well here. They don't fight you head-on. They harass, scatter, taunt. Small groups of mounted archers ride in, fire a storm of arrows, then vanish before your commander finishes shouting formation. One guy jokes that he's seen more of the enemy's horse butts than his own campmates. You laugh, but nervously. Because he's right. Supplies dwindle. Again. Remember those Byzantine allies? They promised to resupply along the route. What they didn't say is how sparse those depots would be, or how fast your own people would loot them dry the minute they're in sight. The last time food arrived, a fist fight broke out over a dried figure. You ate your fig quietly in the corner while pretending not to see the guy who lost a tooth over it. And then comes Doralium. You're told it's just another stop. A regrouping point. But it turns into your first real taste of full-on disaster. You and the others in the vanguard make camp on a plain near a stream. The sun dips low, and for once, things feel manageable. You even let your shoulders relax. That's when the Seljuks come. It's not a raid this time. It's an ambush. Thousands of them. They ride in from the hills like the wind itself has decided to kill you. You barely have time to grab your helmet before the arrows start falling. You don't see the enemy at first, just the results of their precision. A man beside you topples forward with a shaft sticking out of his eye. Another screams as his horse is shot out from under him, pinning him in the dust. You try to run to the center of camp, but there is no center anymore, just spirals of confusion, flailing limbs, fire, and frantic praying. The Crusader leaders are shouting orders you can't hear. Smoke is rising. You drop behind a broken cart and hold your breath as hooves thunder past, so close the ground itself seems to whimper. Time stretches. Seconds feel like entire chapters of suffering. You crouch and wait, clutching your dagger, which suddenly feels less like a weapon and more like a desperate suggestion. But just when everything seems lost, the second wave of Crusaders, led by your noble contingent, arrives. Reinforcements sweep in, charging across the field with banners flying, horns blaring, and armor glinting like hope itself. The Seljuks retreat. Fast. Strategic. Gone like they were never there. The camp is left in ruins. Bodies everywhere. Smoke clinging to your skin. The stream runs red for a while. You don't drink from it. You can't even look at it. Later that night, the surviving nobles call it a victory. A miracle. Proof that God is on your side. You try to nod. But mostly you sit silently, scraping arrowheads out of the dirt and wondering how many more of these miracles you can survive. There's a grim rhythm now. Wake. March. Starve. Panic. Repeat. The weather gets cruel. It's either roasting you alive or soaking you in sideways rain. Some nights you sleep on rocks, using your shoes as a pillow. Other nights you don't sleep at all, too much coughing, groaning, whispering of people talking to the dead like they've already given up. And the diseases? Oh, they've leveled up. It's not just dysentery and lice anymore. Someone down the line gets a flesh wound that turns black and bubbly. You stare, horrified, as the camped doctor wraps it in wine-soaked rags, murmuring a prayer about purification. Fringe tip, wine was often used as antiseptic back then. Not because it worked great, but because it was slightly less likely to kill you than swamp water. Historians still argue whether this was based more on superstition or genuine medical reasoning. You find small joys in the worst places. A crust of unspoiled bread. A stream that doesn't taste like feet. One evening, a merchant from northern France sings an old love song in a language you barely understand, and you feel something break open in your chest, homesickness, maybe. Or just the sheer emotional luxury of not being actively shot at. But mostly, you keep moving. The army snakes through Anatolia like an ulcer, slow, painful, and impossible to ignore. Eventually, the land changes. Less scorched earth, more hills, trees, signs of civilization. You hear rumors, hopeful ones. We're getting close. Just a few more weeks. Anch is ahead. And with that name comes something new. Expectation. Because Anch isn't just another city. It's the city. The gateway to the Holy Land. A bastion of Christian and Islamic culture, coveted by both for centuries. It's massive, legendary, steeped in stories about apostles and empires. You imagine glittering walls, echoing bells, maybe even a welcome feast. You imagine washing your feet in clean water and falling asleep indoors. But you should know better by now. Because Anch won't welcome you. It'll try to kill you. Again and again. But that comes later. For now, you finally crest a hill and look down to see the city sprawled before you. Imposing, fortified, and very, very closed. The gates are shut tight. The towers bristle with defenders. And your leaders smile like this is fine. You wonder if they're delusional or just trying to keep morale up. You don't have time to decide. Because the siege is about to begin. You stare at Anch like a moth at a bonfire. It's huge. That's your first thought. Not just city huge, fortress huge. Its stone walls rise like cliffs, thick and ancient and utterly smug about being impregnable. Towers loom every 100 feet or so, each bristling with defenders in chainmail, their bows already drawn and tracking your every move. You hear drums. Bells. A distant shout in a language you don't know. And somewhere behind you, someone says what you're thinking. How are we supposed to take that? Your commanders don't answer. They just tell you to set up camp. So you do. Kind of. There's no plan. Just a sprawl of tents, campfires, and frustrated shouting as thousands of crusaders try to figure out where to sleep without getting trampled or accidentally pitching camp in the middle of someone else's latrine. Soon the siege begins. And that's when you learn something really important. Sieging a city is incredibly boring, right up until it's suddenly not. You thought this would be non-stop action. Scaling ladders, swords clashing, dramatic last stands on burning towers. That's what the songs promised, right? Wrong. What you get is mud. Mud, and monotony, and endless waiting. You dig trenches. You haul wood. You try to build siege towers, but half your lumber was burned as firewood weeks ago, and no one really remembers how siege towers are supposed to work. The city, meanwhile, does not seem impressed. Anch sits on its hill like a bored giant, shrugging off your attempts to intimidate it. Archers take potshots at anyone who gets too close. Sometimes they hit. Sometimes they don't. Once, they launch a pig's head over the wall as a joke. Someone writes a psalm about it. The days stretch into weeks. Then months. Food runs out almost immediately. You'd think an army planning to siege a major city would have brought enough supplies, but logistics isn't exactly a crusader specialty. Plus, the surrounding countryside? Already picked clean. Every chicken, every root, every vaguely edible plant has been devoured. The only things left are rocks and the occasional very suspicious-looking frog. You try boiling leather. You eat grass. At one point, you hear about a guy roasting his belt for breakfast. Another claims to have found a nest of eggs, but refuses to say where. His tent gets accidentally torn down later that night. It gets worse. Winter hits. Rain, wind, sleet, the works. Tents collapse under the weight of wet snow. Fires refuse to light. Your cloak smells like mold and desperation. You haven't been dry in weeks. And the cold seeps in, deeper than your bones, like even your soul is shivering. Then the disease comes back. This time it's typhus, or maybe dysentery, or maybe something no one's named yet. Doesn't matter. People are dropping like flies. You bury 3 men in a single day. There are too many bodies, not enough ground. Someone suggests building a pyre. Someone else suggests letting God sort it out. You try not to get sick. You fail. It starts with a headache. Then the fever. Then the hallucinations. You're not sure how many days you spend curled up in your tent, mumbling about apples and trying to remember your mother's face. You dream that the walls eventually open on their own and offer you cheese. You wake up screaming, and your bunkmate just hands you a canteen and says, "Same." Fringe tidbit: some crusaders reportedly ate rats, dogs, and even the dead during the worst stretches of the siege. Historians still argue whether this was desperation, myth, or exaggerated by later chroniclers to make the Crusaders look both heroic and horrifying. But amidst the misery, something shifts. Whispers begin to circulate. Not just rumors, hopeful rumors. Someone knows someone who knows a guard inside the city. A traitor. A sympathizer. Someone who might be willing to open a gate for a price. You don't believe it at first. Sounds too good. Like a fever dream. But the whispers grow louder. And one cold, dark night, it happens. The traitor, an Armenian named Firuz, leads a small group of crusaders to a hidden postern gate. They scale a wall. Kill the guards. Open the way. And just like that, you're in. You don't hear the shouting at first. You're asleep, face down on a moldy cloak. Then a trumpet blasts, and suddenly everyone is running, grabbing weapons, shouting the gates open. Anch's ours. You don't even lace your boots properly. You just go. What follows is chaos. You pour into the city like water through a crack. Screams echo off stone. Fires spark. You don't know who's enemy and who's innocent. You try not to think about it. Your sword is in your hand and your body is moving, and there's no time to process what's happening. You reach the inner quarter, and the resistance is fierce. Seljuk defenders rally, fighting back with everything they've got. You duck behind a wall just as a spear lodges in the space where your head was a heartbeat ago. The alley stinks of smoke and blood. You press on. By sunrise, it's over. Anch is yours. Sort of. Because while you control the city now, the Seljuk reinforcements are on their way. Thousands of them. Led by Kerboga, a general with a real army, not the ragged, starving collection of holy fanatics you've become. Now you're the ones under siege. And this siege is worse than the last. Because this time, you're trapped inside with too many mouths, too little food, and no way out. The city, once a prize, becomes a prison. Rations are laughable. The bread is moldy, the water tastes like rust, and no one's sure if the meat is even meat. You start boiling bones. You chew old sandals. One knight eats wax from a candle and says it's surprisingly filling. You know he's lying. You try it anyway. The deaths mount. People collapse in the streets. The stink is unbearable. You help carry a stretcher down a corridor slick with something unidentifiable, and the man on it is already gone, his eyes open but empty. Morale? Obliterated. Until someone finds it. A monk named Peter Bartholomew claims he's had a vision. Saint Andrew told him where to find the Holy Lance, the very spear that pierced Christ's side. In Anch. Under a chapel. They dig. And dig. And dig. After hours of nothing, Peter jumps in the pit and pulls out something. A rusty spearhead. You should be skeptical. Everyone should be. But no one is. Because faith is all you've got left. People cheer. Cry. Drop to their knees. You, too. You want, need, to believe that God hasn't forgotten you. Fueled by this miracle, the Crusaders launch one last desperate attack on Kerboga's forces outside the walls. And somehow, you win. The Seljuks flee. The siege ends. You're alive. Again. But Anj? It's in ruins. Half the army is gone. Everyone looks 10 years older. No one smiles for real. You expected celebration. You get silence. You sit on a broken stone in the shadow of a still smoldering tower and wonder. Is this what glory feels like? You don't leave Anj a hero. You leave a husk. Your bones ache, your clothes hang from you like someone else's rags, and your eyes have that dry, far-off glaze that only comes from watching too many people die too close. You walk with a limp now, though you don't remember how you got it. One of the older knights jokes you've been ignited by hunger, and you both laugh, mostly because it's either that or cry in front of a rat. But the march resumes. Because this isn't the end. Anj was never the prize. Jerusalem still waits. Far to the south, across more mountains, deserts, and cities with walls that laugh at your ladders. So you march. Again. The good news? You've got momentum now. Sort of. The leaders have declared Anj proof of divine favor, and everyone's clinging to that like it's a heated blanket in the snow. The Holy Lance is carried at the front of the procession, wrapped in velvet and guarded like a royal baby. Even the skeptical ones, you among them, shut up and nod. The bad news? Everything else. You're weaker than ever. Fewer in number. Supplies are somehow even worse. And the longer the journey goes on, the more the unity that once held the army together starts to unravel. The nobles, remember them? The leaders have started fighting again. Not sword fighting. Talking fighting. Which is worse? Every decision is an argument. Every delay is a negotiation. Bohemond won't give up Anj. Raymond wants to push for Jerusalem immediately. Godfrey tries to stay neutral, which just annoys everyone. Meanwhile, you're trying to keep your boots from falling apart. Sometimes it feels like they've forgotten you're here at all. You and the rest of the foot soldiers, the camp followers, the cooks, the standard bearers. The ones who bleed when decisions are bad. You keep moving, step after painful step, while the nobles bicker over maps they barely understand. And then, something strange. As you cross the Levant, hot, dry, stony, you begin to see places you've only ever heard of in Bible readings. Tyre. Acre. Caesarea. Even the names feel sacred, like stepping into a storybook. You pass olive groves where they say Jesus once walked. A crumbling aqueduct, Roman in design, arches across the horizon like some ancient scar. You can't help but feel something reverent. But then the road bends again, and someone vomits from heat exhaustion, and another guy breaks his foot on a rock the size of a mango. Sacred, sure. But still awful. Fringe tidbit, some crusaders collected holy dirt from along the way, stuffing it into pouches like it would ward off dysentery. Historians still argue whether this was sincere devotion or just something to trade later when food ran out again. You pass through towns that glare at you from behind shuttered windows. Some of them belong to Christians, Eastern Orthodox, Armenian, Maronite, but that doesn't always mean they're happy to see you. More often, they fear you. And can you blame them? You've heard what your side has done. Looting, forced conversions, the occasional accidental fire that wipes out an entire neighborhood. God's army is not subtle. You try to be better. You give a thirsty child your last sip of water. Her mother nods, but doesn't smile. You walk on. Eventually, your army reaches Maara. You wish it hadn't. It's just another fortified town at first glance. But it holds food, and food means survival, and that's all the logic your leaders need. The siege begins. You help haul stones. Your hands are covered in cuts from dragging wood for the towers. You haven't eaten in 2 days, and even the leather of your belt is starting to look tasty again. The town falls after 2 weeks. And then, things go dark. Really dark. The sack of Maara becomes a horror story told in whispers. You hear rumors, at first just rumors, about what some crusaders did when they couldn't find food. They didn't just loot. They cooked. You don't want to believe it. But then you see the burned bones piled in a corner house. You hear the jokes. You see a knight sharpen his knife with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. The air smells like meat and smoke and something you can't quite identify. And suddenly your stomach churns, not from hunger, but from knowing. Mainstream fact, the chronicler Radulf of Caen wrote that some crusaders boiled pagan adults and roasted children. Other chroniclers disputed it, and modern historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerated, fabricated, or terrifyingly accurate. You don't partake. But you don't stop it, either. You're too weak. Too afraid. Too hungry. You pray. A lot. And for the first time, the prayers feel empty. After Myra, things change. Not on the outside. The army marches on. The banners still fly. The Holy Lance still gleams in the sun. But inside? There's a crack in the faith. You feel it in your bones, like a bruise that won't heal. You still want to believe this is a holy mission. That you're doing something noble. But you've seen too much. Heard too many screams. Buried too many children. And yet, Jerusalem is close. Just over the next ridge. Just a few more days. That's what they keep saying. You don't know whether to hope or fear it. But you keep walking. What else is there? One night, as you camp near a ruined cistern, an old man beside you, someone from the Rhineland, probably a baker in his past life, leans over and says, "If I make it, I'm never leaving Jerusalem. I'll just lie down in a chapel and wait for heaven." You nod. Then ask, "And if you don't make it?" He shrugs. "Then I guess I've already seen hell." You both laugh. But not for long. Because tomorrow, it begins again. March, sweat, starve, pray. And then, finally, when the sun rises behind that last ridge, you see it. The holy city. Jerusalem. Golden in the light. Still so far. Still so dangerous. Still capable of breaking you completely. The first thing you notice about Jerusalem, besides the fact that it's real, actually real, standing there at the horizon like a dream hardened into stone, is how quiet it looks. Not peaceful. Not serene. Just waiting. And maybe that's worse. You expected choirs of angels. Trumpets. A divine wind blowing back your sweaty hair like in the paintings. But instead, it's a city wrapped in stillness, surrounded by walls taller than you imagined, gates sealed tight, and the sun beating down like it wants to melt your resolve before you even get close. You arrive at its doorstep filthy, sunburnt, and emotionally fried. And now you're supposed to conquer the most sacred city in Christendom. No pressure. The leaders call for another siege. Of course they do. You wonder if they've ever had an original idea. But this time, there's a problem even bigger than the usual. We have no food and everyone smells like sadness. This time, there's no wood. Like, literally none. Jerusalem sits atop rocky hills where trees don't grow. No lumber means no siege towers. No battering rams. No catapults. Just thousands of tired men staring up at a wall, wondering if they're supposed to climb it with prayers. So what do? They improvise. They strip every cart, wagon, and wooden bowl they can find. They cut down olive trees older than their grandparents. Someone sacrifices a family heirloom chair, and there's a whole 5-minute argument about it before the legs get sawed off and added to the pile. Engineers, and you use that term loosely, start building siege towers from scratch. You're put on wheel duty, which mostly involves spinning a pole and not crying. The heat is unbearable. The water is brackish. Someone faints into a pile of nails, and the medic just sighs. Still, the towers take shape. Slowly. Wobbly, awkward, too narrow, but real. You sleep beside yours like it's a trusted friend. You even name it Saint Splinter. Fringe tidbit: some Crusaders reportedly used animal fat to waterproof their siege engines, which meant butchering whatever was still vaguely alive in the camp, including horses, dogs, and once, someone's beloved goat. Historians still argue whether this was practical necessity or just another sign of the siege's utter desperation. Meanwhile, tensions boil. There's no single leader, remember. Just a rotating cast of nobles with egos the size of castles. Every decision is a tug-of-war. Some want to delay, fortify the camp, wait for reinforcements. Others say strike now or die trying. You? You just want a piece of bread that isn't made of regret. Then, on the 8th day, a priest leads a barefoot procession around the city walls. He says it's what Joshua did at Jericho. They march, chanting, singing, dust clinging to their sweaty faces like ash. You join them, half because it feels holy, half because standing still hurts more than walking. You watch as knights and peasants alike lower their eyes, murmuring psalms. And for a moment, just a flicker, you feel something again. Not strength, but purpose. The attack comes at dawn. The siege towers roll forward, creaking like dying whales. Arrows fill the air. You raise your shield just in time to catch a dart with your forearm. It stings, but you're too busy pushing to stop. The walls loom close. You're screaming now, but so is everyone else, so it blends into a single roar. The tower lurches as defenders hurl rocks and boiling oil. A man beside you vanishes with a crunching sound. You try not to look. Just keep pushing. Then, impact. The tower hits the wall. A drawbridge drops. And you climb. It's madness. The top of the tower sways like a ship in a storm. Arrows whistle past your ears. Someone's on fire. Someone else is laughing, of all things, and then you're over the parapet, sword raised, eyes wide. Jerusalem is beneath your feet. You've made it. The next few hours? Chaos. Fighting spreads through the streets like wildfire. Every corner, every stairwell, every rooftop is a battleground. You can't tell who's who half the time. And no one's giving orders anymore. It's just survival. You pass churches, mosques, homes. Some are burning. Some are screaming. You keep your head down and do what you must. Because in that moment, there's no theology. No mission. Just the raw, animal truth of being alive in a place where others are dying. Mainstream fact: when the Crusaders took Jerusalem in July 1099, the massacre was so extreme that some chroniclers described blood running knee-deep in the streets. Modern historians debate the accuracy of that image, but not the fact that thousands were killed indiscriminately. You find a rooftop and sit there for a long time, staring out over the city. The dome of the rock glows in the sun. The Temple Mount is silent now. There are bodies in the alleys below, but for the first time in weeks, you can hear birds. You'd think the victory would feel like deliverance. You expected trumpets, angels, maybe even a free meal. But all you feel is numb. And tired. So tired. They hold a mass the next day. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You join the others, kneeling among broken pillars and blood-stained robes. The priest's voice echoes through the ruined hall, reciting words that feel disconnected. Sacred, sure, but detached from what just happened. You glance around. Some are crying. Some are praying. Some just stare blankly at the walls, as if waiting for something, anything, to make this feel worth it. And maybe that's the part you didn't expect. You won. You reached Jerusalem. You took the holy city with your own blistered hands. But the cost? No one told you about the cost. You wonder who you'd be if you'd stayed home. A farmer, maybe. A baker. Someone who never had to see what a man looks like when he's lost both his family and his teeth in the same hour. But that version of you is long gone. Buried under sand and ash and memories you'll never be able to clean from your conscience. Still, you made it. And in the eyes of your fellow crusaders, that makes you blessed. Chosen. Holy. You're not so sure. But for now, you close your eyes and whisper your thanks. Not to God. To the earth beneath your knees. Because it's solid. And still. And that's enough. You're not sure what's worse, getting to Jerusalem or what happens after. Victory is supposed to mean going home. You thought once you saw the Holy Sepulchre with your own eyes, kissed the stone where Christ was said to rise, you'd just pack your bag, maybe pick up a relic or two, and trot off into a sunset full of gratitude and mild back pain. But, no. You stay. Most do. Not because you want to. Not exactly. But because you can't leave. Not yet. First, there's no plan. Like, literally none. The Crusade leaders clearly never figured out what to do after winning. It's as if they expected the second coming to take care of logistics. So instead, they squabble. Again. Godfrey of Bouillon claims Jerusalem but refuses to be called king. He prefers the humble-sounding titles Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. Which would be sweet if it weren't followed by the construction of a palace and an armed entourage. You watch him ride past once, his cloak blowing in the breeze, and you think, huh. Defender sure looks a lot like ruler. Meanwhile, others sulk. Raymond of Toulouse is furious. Bohemond, remember him? He's back in Ensch, sitting on his stolen city like a toddler with a new toy. And Baldwin, Godfrey's brother, is already eyeing Edessa, dreaming of a separate kingdom. So you, dear Crusader, are stuck in a holy city ruled by a man with a fancy title and an army too broke to pay itself. To make things worse, Jerusalem is a mess. Half ruined. Half abandoned. Blood still drying on stones that pilgrims once kissed. There's no infrastructure for the thousands of surviving Crusaders, let alone new arrivals from Europe still trickling in, expecting manna and miracles. You sleep on the roof of a chapel, next to a man who snores like thunder and a woman who coughs like her lungs are trying to escape. You beg for food at local markets, where Arabic, Greek, and Latin blur into a tired sort of commerce. Sometimes the locals spit at you. Sometimes they hand you figures. You never know which. Fringe tidbit, some Crusaders, desperate to make their stay worthwhile, began chiseling bits of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre off the walls to take home. Tiny stones were sold as a genuine fragments of Christ's tomb. Historians still argue whether most were fakes or just taken from the outhouse wall by mistake. You consider leaving anyway. But the roads are dangerous. Bandits, deserters, angry peasants with sharp sticks. And then there's the real issue, you don't know how to get home. You followed banners and hope to get here. There's no Google Maps. No itinerary. Only rumors of ships in Jaffa. Or maybe Acre. If you can find a caravan. Or a coin. But you have no coin. You pawn your helmet for a cup of lentils. Welcome to post-Crusade reality. Meanwhile, tensions are building. Again. Not just between nobles, but between faiths. The city is now under Latin Christian control, which sounds tidy until you realize there are already Christians here. Eastern Christians. Armenians, Syriacs, Greeks. And they don't exactly see eye to eye with the new Western arrivals. At first, you think, hey, we're all Christian, right? But that dream crumbles quickly. Fights break out in churches over who gets to clean the tomb. One group prefers incense. Another chants differently. At one point, a monk punches another monk over a candle. You're not even surprised anymore. Mainstream fact, after the Crusader conquest, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre became a battleground, not just for power, but for control of space and ritual between multiple Christian denominations. The Latin Church imposed dominance, sidelining others for decades. You try to stay out of it. You visit the tomb, barefoot and quiet. You light a candle. You even carve a cross into the wall. Small, barely visible. A mark that says, I was here, I survived this. One day, you meet a knight from Normandy who says he's leaving. Bought passage on a Genoese ship. You ask how he managed it. I traded my sword, he says. You blink. Wasn't it blessed? He shrugs. So was my stomach, and it was louder. You try to do the same, but your sword's too rusty. No takers. So you stay. Weeks pass. Maybe months. You lose track. You pick up odd jobs, hauling water, sweeping steps at a chapel, holding candles for services. You even try your hand at guiding pilgrims, but your Latin is bad and your directions worse. One group ends up in a goat yard. They don't tip. Still, the city hums with strange beauty. At night, the moon rises over the Temple Mount like a silver coin. You sit on a rooftop, knees pulled to your chest, and listen to the distant call of an evening prayer. It's not your religion, but it's peaceful. One evening, a priest preaches that the Crusaders have paved the way for Christ's return. He says every drop of blood was worth it. That heaven is watching. You don't say anything. You just think of Mara. And the man beside you who roasted a rat without flinching. And the woman who buried her son outside the Jaffa Gate with her bare hands. You think of how you still twitch awake at night, swordless, gasping for water. If heaven's watching, you wish it would blink. A month later, a rider arrives with news: an army of Muslims is gathering in the south. Some say it's led by an Egyptian general. Others say it's the Caliph himself. Whatever the truth, the message is clear: Jerusalem is not safe. Not yet. Maybe not ever. So you clean your sword. Patch your tunic. Put on your cracked boots. Again. Because the crusade didn't end. It just mutated. You're not a pilgrim anymore. You're a soldier in a kingdom that doesn't know how to govern. And soon, you'll bleed for it. Again. But tonight, at least, you sleep in the holy city. Which feels less like a miracle. And more like a dare. You're dreaming of bread when the bells ring. Not church bells, the frantic kind. War bells. The kind that say, drop whatever holy object you're polishing and grab a weapon, because someone's about to test the strength of your city walls. You're on your feet in seconds, heart racing, brain still foggy. Half the city is already in motion, crusaders shoving on armor over robes, monks shouting prayers from windows, children ducking under carts. The Muslim army is here. They come from Egypt this time, organized, well-fed, probably bathed more recently than you. Their leader is Al-Aftal, the Fatimid vizier, and unlike most of the Crusader forces, he knows what he's doing. Jerusalem braces. You're assigned to the northern wall, standing behind a hastily repaired parapet with a spear that might actually be a glorified broom handle. You trade jokes with the man next to you, or not because anything's funny, but because if you don't laugh, you'll freeze. Maybe they'll get lost, he says. Maybe they'll die of heat stroke. Maybe we'll die of heat stroke. You both go quiet. From the ramparts, you can see the enemy tents stretch like a woven carpet across the hills. Banners flap, fires flicker, horses snort. You chew your lip and try not to think about Myra. Or Ansh. Or how many times you've already cheated death. Siege begins. Again. But this time, you're the one inside the walls. Funny how the roles flip. The defenders rush to fortify weak points. You help reinforce the gate with barrels and rocks. No siege towers yet, but ladders are coming. You're sure of it. You've used them. Now someone else will try to climb while you stab from above. The irony tastes like copper. The enemy catapults start hurling stones. Some hit houses. Some smash into courtyards. One takes out a chapel where you once lit a candle. You wince, not from grief, but because it was your favorite hiding spot during sermons. Mainstream fact: in 1102, Jerusalem faced attacks from Fatimid forces trying to reclaim the city from Crusader control. These skirmishes were part of an ongoing pattern of counterattacks that lasted for decades, often putting Crusaders in a defensive position shortly after their victory. You spend your days between shifts patching arrow holes, boiling pitch, and praying for a relief force. Baldwin, now King Baldwin I after Godfrey's death, has gone south to confront another attack and might be weeks away. No reinforcements. No spare weapons. Just grit and guilt. There's a rumor going around that the Fatimids are offering gold to anyone who opens the city gate. You laugh when you hear it. Not because it's funny, but because you get it. If someone offered you a way out, you might take it too. A few days in, morale drops like a stone. Food runs low again. Always food. You chew on stale biscuit so hard your jaw clicks. Your comrade gnaws on his belt strap. Maybe as a joke. Maybe not. At night, you dream of the sea. Not home. Just water. Clean, endless water. Then, something changes. The enemy pulls back. Not far, but enough to make people hopeful. Maybe it's a trap. Maybe they're regrouping. But the lull gives you time to breathe. To think. To remember what you're doing here. You realize you've forgotten. Seriously. You started as a pilgrim. A spiritual warrior. A humble servant of Christ. But now you're just a guy with a spear and a 1,000-yard stare, protecting a place that's not yours, from people you barely understand, in the name of an idea that feels increasingly blurry. Fringe tidbit: some Crusaders began carrying around small pouches of Jerusalem dirt to remind themselves why they'd come. A few even ate tiny spoonfuls of it in moments of doubt. Historians still argue whether it helped them feel spiritually grounded, or just gave them stomachaches. By week's end, the defenders get lucky. A Crusader patrol returns with news that Baldwin's army is nearby and winning. Rumors fly that the enemy has lost heart. The next morning, you squint across the plain and, yes, tents are being taken down. The Fatimids are retreating. You won. Again. But no one cheers. It's not like last time. There are no parades. No hymns. Just quiet sighs and people collapsing where they stand. One guy weeps into his helmet for 10 straight minutes. Another starts cleaning his sword with a dead man's cloak. It's like everyone's running on the memory of hope. That night, Baldwin rides in. Crowned, battered, regal in a blood-stained cape. He gives a speech. You're too tired to remember what he says. You just remember that he brought bread. Actual bread. Soft, warm, with flavor. You eat it like it's the body of Christ, and maybe that's the first time you felt close to God in weeks. Afterward, repairs begin. Again. Jerusalem's walls are patched. Towers reinforced. New rules are posted: curfews, taxes, religious zones. Latin clergy take over more churches, pushing out Eastern sects. The power balance tilts more firmly toward the West. And you? You get a job guarding the Holy Sepulchre. 8 hours a day, spear in hand, watching pilgrims file in. Some weep. Some kneel. Some just take a quick peek, mutter something under their breath, and leave, like it's a tourist stop. You nod to each one. Silent. Stoic. Haunted. One day, a boy asks you if this is where Jesus was really buried. You shrug. Maybe. But you live here, right? You should know. You look down at the boy's wide eyes and remember your own. The fire. The speeches. The banners with painted crosses. And then you say, "Kid, there's a lot of holes in this story." He frowns. But it's a holy city. You smile. Exactly. The boy leaves, confused. You stay, guarding a tomb that may or may not be real, in a city that eats its heroes and buries its villains in the same dust. Historians still argue whether the Crusaders believed in the holiness of their mission, or if that belief faded with every bloody step. You don't argue. You just live it. Day by day. Guarding ghosts. chasing echoes, waiting for the next siege. Because you know it's coming. It always is. You wake up to the sound of someone shouting in French and, annoyingly, playing a flute. A bad one. You groan, roll over, and remember, oh right. You're still in Jerusalem. Still stuck in your soldier's tunic that smells like boiled onions and regret. And now, apparently, your new neighbors are a group of recently arrived pilgrims from Provence who think it's a good idea to throw a sunrise party on the steps of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You drag yourself to your feet. Another day in paradise. See, here's the twist no one back home talks about. The crusade didn't end with Jerusalem. It just evolved. It became permanent. And now, you're a proud resident of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a new state held together by old grudges, empty promises, and an awkward blend of Latin rule over a non-Latin world. The people running the show? Mostly nobles from France and Italy who decided they like sunshine more than snow and blood more than boredom. They carved the Holy Land into feudal-style counties and baronies, each with its own paranoid warlord, tax system, and wildly ambitious plan to fortify everything. Mainstream fact, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was officially established in 1099, with Baldwin I crowned in 1100. It survived, barely, for almost 200 years, constantly under threat and propped up by waves of new crusaders and European money. You're not a tourist anymore. You're part of this place now. Sort of. You've been assigned to help maintain a castle near Ramla, nothing fancy, just a dusty outpost with 4 stone towers, 1 sulky priest, and a kitchen that's mostly a hole in the ground where someone throws lentils and salt and prays for flavor. Your job is to man the walls, scare off raiders, and occasionally escort travelers across the countryside. Sounds straightforward, until you remember the countryside hates you. The local population? Not thrilled about your continued presence. Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians alike regard you with caution, resentment, or outright hostility. And who can blame them? You came here waving swords and shouting Latin. Some days you get rocks thrown at you. Other days, it's just the silent treatment. But the tension simmers, always. You can feel it in the air, like storm clouds behind a thin curtain of sunlight. You escort a monk once who keeps trying to convert the local children with stale cookies and sermons. You gently suggest he stop. He tells you God will protect him. 3 hours later, someone steals his shoes. God works in mysterious ways. You learn to navigate it all, quietly. You learn some Arabic, just enough to barter for pomegranates without getting overcharged. You figure out which wells are poisoned. You start carrying extra sandals because yours keep getting stolen. And then there's the politics. Back in Jerusalem, things are messy. Again. With Godfrey and now Baldwin I gone, leadership changes hands. You hear names like Baldwin II, Fulk, Melisande, a royal game of musical chairs. Alliances form, collapse, reform. Nobles marry each other's sisters, betray each other's brothers, and occasionally poison each other's dinner guests. You once guard a feast where a baron accuses another of stealing relics. The accused spits wine into his face. A fight breaks out involving a leg of lamb and a ceremonial crucifix. Nobody dies, but the choir gets trampled. You stand in the corner, wondering if this counts as penance. Fringe tidbit, some nobles in the Crusader states would wear fragments of holy bone sewn into their sleeves for protection. One was later found to be a chicken bone, carefully polished and labeled St. Ethelbert's thumb. Historians still argue whether it was a scam or just wishful thinking. The weirdest part? You almost get used to it. Life in the Crusader state settles into a rhythm. One day you're patrolling vineyards planted by Frankish monks. The next, you're dodging arrows on a narrow goat trail. Then you're drinking fermented camel's milk with a Syrian merchant who once tried to rob you. But nothing stays calm for long. Because there's always a new crusade on the way. Yep. They just keep coming. Ships arrive in waves, vomiting out sweaty pilgrims with swords, relics, and way too much confidence. Most of them have no idea what they're walking into. One guy asks you if it's true the air in Jerusalem heals skin conditions. You just point to your own rash and smile. They're here for redemption. For salvation. For whatever their local bishop promised them after a few too many glasses of wine. You watch them arrive, bright-eyed and hopeful. And you think, I was you once. You help a few. Warn others. Laugh with some. Fight alongside a handful who actually survive more than a season. Some bring fancy new armor. Others bring disease. One group brings a donkey painted with a red cross who immediately kicks a bishop in the shin. Honestly, you like the donkey best. But with each wave comes more tension. More food shortages. More pressure on local populations. More friction with Muslim neighbors who are not thrilled that this region now has a permanent camp of unpredictable warriors claiming divine real estate. And then, rumors. Always rumors. Whispers of a charismatic leader rising in the east. Of Muslim tribes uniting. Of revenge building like pressure in a pipe. You're told to reinforce the walls again. You do it. Grimly. Quietly. Because you know what's coming. You've seen it before. The cycle. Pilgrimage. War. Victory. Arrogance. Retaliation. And here you are, spinning inside it. You try to remember why you came. Was it faith? Glory? A sin too heavy to carry? You've long stopped asking forgiveness. You've stopped believing the blood on your hands gets rinsed away by holy water. It just settles into your skin, permanent as sunlight on limestone. You once thought dying in Jerusalem would guarantee you paradise. Now you just hope dying quickly will spare you another siege. And still, you stay. Not because of loyalty. But because, where else would you go? You don't belong in Europe anymore. Not really. You've forgotten how to walk on cobbled roads without checking the rooftops for arrows. You've forgotten how to sit in a quiet church without scanning the door for an ambush. You've forgotten how to be someone who didn't survive Mara. So you stay. Guarding a border that's never truly drawn. Living in a kingdom built on borrowed time. Breathing dust, drinking bitter wine, dodging politics, dodging arrows, dodging questions about salvation. You smile at the new recruits. You warn them not to drink from the western well, it's got worms. You tell them to sleep light. To bury their relics deep. And if they hear a flute playing at dawn, run. The wind shifts. You feel it first at night, when the air carries whispers from the east. Campfires further out than they should be. Footsteps along familiar trade routes, but heavier now, more armored. Not merchants. Not monks. Something else. Word spreads before the messengers do, the Muslims are uniting. After decades of squabbling dynasties and warlord turf wars, someone's finally herding the cats. Someone clever. Someone terrifying. His name is Zenji. And even before you see his banner, you know, this man is not like the others. You're stationed in the north now, near Edessa, the far edge of the Crusade estates. The county of Edessa has always been the weakest of the four, sparsely populated, poorly defended, full of infighting nobles and long, lonely roads that snake through endless brown hills. It's also the first to fall. Mainstream fact, in 1144, Zengi, the Atabeg of Mosul and Aleppo, captured the city of Edessa, marking the first major Muslim victory against the Crusade estates. It sent shockwaves through Europe and prompted the launch of the Second Crusade. You don't see the fall of Edessa. You hear about it the way you hear about an earthquake in a neighboring town, rumble first, then dust, then screaming survivors with no shoes and even fewer teeth. The city's taken so fast, it barely resists. The walls crumble. The churches burn. The garrison flees. And everyone else, well, no one's counting. You meet a priest who escaped with nothing but a broken finger and a silver crucifix. He babbles about ladders, about fire raining from rooftops, about a commander who slit his own throat rather than surrender. You pour water in his mouth and pretend it helps. So, yeah, Zenj is here. He's organized. He's brutal. And he's not interested in pilgrims or relics. He wants land. Strategy. Control. The panic in the Crusader states is immediate and clumsy. Messages are sent to Europe, carried by exhausted riders with scrolls strapped to their thighs. They beg for help, plead for reinforcements, shout into the void across oceans. And it works. Sort of. The Second Crusade is born. You roll your eyes when you hear. Because you already know how it'll go. More waves of fresh-faced knights. More banners. More sermons. More assumptions that this war is still about saving souls rather than saving territory. But this time, Europe sends its top-tier talent. King Louis VII of France. And Conrad III of Germany. Yep. Real kings. With real armies. Real egos. Real headaches. They land in stages, and you're part of the team sent to receive them. You stand along the docks of Acre, watching them disembark with their polished armor and their flag-draped horses and their endless procession of cooks, scribes, and advisors. You can spot the mistakes instantly. The overpacked carts. The bright, reflective shields. The courtiers with feathered hats who have no idea what dust feels like in their teeth. One German knight trips on a rope and falls face first into a barrel of figures. You don't help him. You're too busy muttering, "This is gonna be Mara all over again." Except worse. Because now, they think they know what they're doing. Conrad's forces march inland almost immediately, and get ambushed near Doryleum. It's a disaster. The heat, the terrain, the ambushers, they all do their part. Hundreds die. Thousands scatter. Those who limp back do so with empty stomachs and shattered pride. King Louis tries the coastal route. Slightly better, but only because he listens, barely, to local crusaders who know the terrain. Still, he loses men. Food. Morale. You're assigned to help guide one of the detachments through the hills of Galilee. A young French squire with clean hands asks if there will be shade along the way. You laugh so hard you nearly choke on your dried dates. Fringe tidbit, a few European knights brought portable chapels with them, literal wooden boxes they'd set up and consecrate wherever they camped. One such chapel was abandoned mid-desert when a camel mistook it for a shady rock and flattened it. The priest was unharmed. The camel was not. Eventually, the Crusade leaders arrive in Jerusalem. And suddenly everyone wants to go after Damascus. Why? Good question. Damascus is strong. Strategically placed. Sort of but not really friendly to the Crusaders at times. But it's also a symbol. And kings love symbols. So they plan the assault. You shake your head the whole time. The plan is rushed. Resources are mismatched. No one agrees on a leader. Some lords argue over tent placement longer than they discuss the attack route. You march anyway. You reach Damascus. You begin the siege. It lasts 4 days. Yes. 4. Historians still argue whether the failure at Damascus was due to poor coordination, internal betrayal, or just the sheer stubborn brilliance of the defenders. Either way, the crusade collapses. The kings argue. The armies dissolve. The dream dies. Again. And you? You trudge back to your post with a 1,000-yard stare and a new sunburn, thinking, this is what happens when people who don't know the desert try to conquer it. You also think, Zenj's son is still out there. His name is ad-Din. And if he's even half as clever as his father, you'd better start reinforcing everything. Back in Jerusalem, the mood is bitter. The locals scowl at the Westerners, who promised salvation and brought nothing but flies and debt. The nobles bicker. The pilgrims pray louder, as if volume could rewind failure. You go back to your patrols. Back to watching the horizon. Back to waiting for the next shoe to drop. Because the Crusades aren't chapters, they are echoes. One leads to another. One mistake compounds into the next. And you're the thread pulled through them all, fraying slowly under the weight of endless, looping disaster. You sharpen your blade. You patch your boots. You whisper, "Here we go again." It's hard to say exactly when you realize you've become one of the old ones. Maybe it's when the new arrivals start calling you Kunkel, even though you're pretty sure you're only 38. Or maybe it's the way the young knights flinch when you talk about Mara like it's a weather report. But it hits you for real the day a wide-eyed recruit from Genoa asks if the Muslims worship the moon. You stare at him, stunned, spoon paused halfway to your mouth. And instead of getting mad, you just sigh and say, "No, kid. They just pray at the right times," which is more than I can say for us. Because by now, you've seen cycles within cycles. You've watched Crusade turn to Kingdom turn to Crisis. And you've watched the Muslim world slowly, stubbornly come together. Enter Nur ad-Din, his Zengi's son, and somehow even more focused. He doesn't waste time with bragging or petty battles. He consolidates power in Syria, fortifies Aleppo and Damascus, and keeps one eye always on Jerusalem. Mainstream fact: Nur ad-Din ruled from 1146 to 1174, uniting much of Syria and gaining popularity among Muslims by framing the conflict as a holy war, or jihad, in response to Crusader occupation. You see his influence ripple outwards. No more random raiding bands. Now it's trained cavalry, disciplined archers, coordinated assaults. You start calling him the Shadow because he always seems a step ahead, even when you're on familiar ground. And here's the real kicker: he's patient. He doesn't rush. Doesn't get cocky. Doesn't even retaliate half the time when provoked. He waits, consolidates, builds. Meanwhile, back in the Crusader states, disaster is a dinner guest. The nobility's at each other's throats again. Queen Melisande rules from Jerusalem, and while she's sharp, smarter than most of the men she rules beside, her son Baldwin III wants the crown early. A family feud with swords. Classic. You end up on a city guard rotation during their standoff. You watch armed groups loyal to each side avoid eye contact while passing in the streets. You keep your helmet on all day, just in case. The compromise comes eventually. Baldwin gets the crown. Melisande keeps her influence. But the cracks stay. And just beyond those cracks, Nur ad-Din, watching, waiting. You start getting reports of fortresses falling on the outskirts. Smaller places, forgotten watchtowers, lone monasteries. Not big enough to make European news, but big enough to make your maps bleed red. Fringe tidbit: some monks in isolated Crusader castles trained crows to carry messages between towers. It worked surprisingly well, until one bird flew straight to a Muslim camp with a note saying, "Send help." Out of water. That castle didn't last the week. You know what's coming. You feel it in your bones like old soldiers feel storms. Nur ad-Din is tightening the noose. And then, just like that, he dies. Stroke, some say. Poison, whisper others. Historians still argue whether his sudden death was natural or the result of internal betrayal. You think, maybe there's hope. Maybe this kingdom can catch its breath. But what you don't realize yet, what no one realizes yet, is that Nur ad-Din's death won't slow the momentum. It will accelerate it. Because now, in Egypt, a new player rises. And he makes Nur ad-Din look like warm-up music. His name is Salah ad-Din. Saladin. You hear the name first in passing, just a footnote in gossip from Alexandria. Some general consolidating power, cleaning up after Nur ad-Din's ambitions. Then he defeats a rival emir. Then he takes Cairo. Then he keeps Cairo. And then you get this strange message from an Armenian merchant passing through Acre: "He's different," the man says. He doesn't kill when he doesn't have to. That gets your attention. Because most generals in this world? They kill because they can. Saladin doesn't. You start watching him like you'd watch a fast-moving storm over dry brush. You don't know where it's going yet, but you know it's going somewhere. Back in Jerusalem, they laugh him off. Just another Eastern strongman, says one lord at a feast, right before choking on a grape seed. But some of you, those who've survived long enough to spot the patterns, you start preparing anyway. You adjust troop rotations. You double your patrols. You tell the new recruits, he's coming. Sooner or later. They nod. They don't believe you. Because the Crusade estates, by now, have grown used to the idea of invincibility. Sure, there are skirmishes, sieges, betrayals. But the walls have held. The relics shine. The churches ring with prayer. And the kings in Europe? They've mostly moved on. No new crusades. No fresh waves of reinforcements. Just a few knights here and there who show up late, confused and sunburned. You watch them drink too much at taverns and wonder if it's even worth teaching them how to hold a spear. Meanwhile, Saladin waits. He doesn't strike at Jerusalem immediately. He builds alliances, marries strategically, gains the loyalty of tribes who once hated him. And then, bit by bit, he starts taking cities. One at a time. Measured. Calculated. You watch your maps get smaller. And you wonder, is this the end of the line? Is this where the Holy Land dream finally breaks? You look at the younger soldiers, how they shine their armor and say Latin prayers before bed, and you can't bring yourself to tell them it's already too late. Instead, you whisper, "Sleep light." Because the storm's building again. And this time, it has a name. You feel it before you see it. The mood in Jerusalem begins to thicken, like honey left too long in the sun, sweet at first, then cloying, then impossible to swallow. Something is shifting, just outside the range of banners and horns. You tighten your belt a notch. Not because you've lost weight, though food is running thin in some quarters, but because you know what's coming. You've lived long enough in this dusty dream to recognize when it's about to sour. Saladin's moving. First comes the chatter. Caravans rerouted. Fortresses suddenly quiet. Bedouin scouts say a great force is gathering near the Jordan River. You glance east and imagine 1,000 hoofs pounding toward you like thunder over stone. Then come the messengers, gasping boys on skeletal horses, their cloaks torn from riding non-stop through thorny valleys. Finally, a date. July 1187. He's coming for Tiberias. And you're marching to meet him. Mainstream fact, the Battle of Hattin took place on July 4, 1187, near the Sea of Galilee. It was a decisive Muslim victory and is often cited as the event that led directly to the fall of Jerusalem. You join King Guy of Lusignan's army as it assembles outside Sephoria. He's technically king of Jerusalem, though no one really wanted him there. He married into the crown, like someone stumbling into a royal costume party and refusing to leave. The army's big, by Crusader standards. Over 1,000 knights, 10,000 foot soldiers, some Italian crossbowmen, and far too many cooks. But what you don't have is water. The plan is to relieve Tiberias, which is under siege. But to get there, you have to cross a dry plain, under a hot July sun, without access to clean water. You advise against it. Others do too. But the nobles, especially Raymond of Tripoli, bicker like hens at a bake sale. Some want to hold position. Some say retreat. Others say fight. Guess which plan wins? You march. Not at dawn. Not smart. Not before sunrise, when the world is still half asleep and the ground's cool. Nope. You march late. And the sun greets you like a vengeful god. Within hours, your armor is boiling. You've stopped sweating, never a good sign. And every time you see a shadow on the horizon, you hope it's a cloud. It never is. Then Saladin strikes. Lightly at first. Harassing cavalry. Arrows. Smoke pots. He's not trying to win yet, he's just trying to make you thirstier. You're on a long slope by afternoon, near twin hills called the Horns of Hattin. The name sounds mythic. In reality, it's two clumps of rock and dust that look like someone left camel droppings on a tabletop. You try to regroup. Form up. Rally the archers. But the smoke is everywhere. Saladin's men have set the grass on fire, dry summer reeds turn to instant hell. Fringe tidbit, according to one account, some Crusader soldiers, half mad with thirst, tried to drink the blood of their fallen horses. Others chewed the leather from their boots. Neither helped much. You barely sleep that night. Not because of the noise, but because of the heat and the hopelessness. In the morning, Saladin surrounds you. His forces are fresh. Yours are parched. The final clash isn't a battle. It's an unraveling. Lines break. Knights scatter. Some fight blindly, some drop their swords and pray. You try to hold formation, but it's like commanding sand in a windstorm. The true cross, the most sacred Christian relic carried into battle, is captured. King Guy is taken alive. So is Raynald of Chatillon, that gleeful warmonger who once bragged about raiding Mecca. Saladin offers him water as a sign of honor. Then, without ceremony, he beheads him. Historians still argue whether this act was coldly strategic or deeply personal, since Raynald had broken every truce and rule of diplomacy for years. Some say Saladin couldn't let such a man live. Others say he simply made an example. You survive. Barely. You crawl from the wreckage of the battle with a cracked helmet and a sprained ankle, hiding under the body of a dead knight until nightfall. Then you limp west, avoiding patrols, keeping your head down. When you finally reach a Crusader outpost near Tyre, the guards don't recognize you. Not because of your face, but because you no longer look like one of them. You look like a ghost. And you feel like one, too. Soon after, the flood begins. Saladin sweeps through the region like a storm without pause. Acre, Sidon, Beirut, Haifa, one by one, the cities fall. Jerusalem is next. And now you're back where you began. In the holy city. The place you were promised as a beacon of salvation. But now? It feels like a tomb. Balian of Ibelin leads the defense. He's not a king or a prophet, just a baron who stayed behind when everyone else fled. He knights every able-bodied man over the age of 16. You line up, touch a rusted sword, and say the words. You pray, too. For once, not sarcastically. Because Saladin surrounds the city. And you know what he can do. But something strange happens. He doesn't slaughter. Doesn't storm the walls without mercy. Instead, he negotiates. He allows the city to surrender peacefully. Promises to let Christians leave. Charges ransom, yes, but not blood. Mainstream fact, when Saladin recaptured Jerusalem in October 1187, he allowed most Christian inhabitants to leave peacefully after paying a fee, a stark contrast to the bloodshed of the First Crusade in 1099. You walk out of the city gates with a sack of clothes and a lump in your throat. It's over. For now. But the story's not finished. Because far away, in Europe, word has spread. Jerusalem has fallen. And kings do not take that lightly. You hear names, Richard the Lionheart, Philip of France, even the German Emperor. They're all gathering forces. A third crusade is forming. And once again, you'll be swept up in its tide. Because you've come too far to quit now. Even if, deep down, you know it's only going to get worse. You probably hoped the third crusade would be a fresh start, a reset button for this endless, exhausting cycle. It wasn't. Instead, it's more like the same old game, played with new dice that keep rolling snake eyes. The year is 1189, and you find yourself back on the docks of Marseille, surrounded by knights, nobles, and peasants with nothing but their faith and dreams in their bags. Richard I of England, the Lionheart, is leading the charge. You hear stories about him everywhere. A warrior king who can swing a sword like a thunderbolt but also has a soft spot for troubadour poetry and horses. Lots of horses. You see him once during a feast, dressed in shining chainmail, golden hair catching the candlelight. He looks every bit the hero you read about in the bard songs. But you know better. Because even heroes have cracks. Mainstream fact: Richard the Lionheart reigned as King of England from 1189 to 1199 and was one of the central commanders of the Third Crusade, known for his military skill but also for spending more time abroad than in England. The Crusade set sail in waves, English, French, German, and a motley crew of knights from across Europe. The sea is rough. The food is worse. You learn the hard way that salt pork tastes exactly like what you'd expect after weeks of storage in the hold. You pass time by trading stories with the other soldiers. Some talk about the glory they hope to find, others are just trying not to puke over the railing. A French knight tells you about a rumor that Saladin's forces have started using a primitive version of a hand cannon, metal tubes that shoot fire and smoke. You chuckle because, sure, that sounds terrifying, if it's true. Fringe tidbit: some contemporary chroniclers mention Muslim engineers experimenting with early gunpowder devices during this period, though historians still argue whether these were effective in battle or more theatrical than tactical. When the Crusader fleet lands in Acre, it's like stepping into a hornet's nest. The city is under siege by Christian forces, but Saladin's army is just outside, keeping them bottled up. The siege drags on for months: rain, mud, and a stubborn disease that seems to pick off soldiers faster than swords. You learn to hate the smell of rotting flesh and stale bread. The nights are long. The days are longer. You start dreaming of your mother's cooking, something simple, like bread dipped in olive oil, not the stinking rations you're stuck with. The political scene is a mess, too. Richard and Philip of France can't stand each other. They argue over everything, from who gets to lead the army to who gets to sleep next to the king's tent. At one point, you overhear Richard muttering about Philip's soft hands and weak French wine. Philip isn't innocent either, he mocks Richard's accent and calls him that lion with no roar. It's like a medieval soap opera, except with more blood and less commercial breaks. Historians still argue whether their rivalry weakened the Crusader cause or kept things interesting enough to avoid outright mutiny. Despite all this, the siege ends in a Christian victory. Acre falls in 1191, but it costs dearly. The city is a ruin by the time you march in. And even with this victory, the war isn't over. You move inland, facing Saladin's forces again and again. You admire his tactical brilliance, the way he anticipates your moves, cutting supply lines, ambushing patrols. He fights not just with swords, but with patience and cunning. One evening, you witness a skirmish near Arsuf. The sun is setting, turning the sky a fiery orange. Richard personally leads the charge, shouting orders with that lion's roar you'd heard about. It's brutal but effective. You feel alive for the first time in months. But even in victory, there's loss. You watch comrades fall, some from wounds, others from exhaustion. You wonder how many more battles you can endure before the land swallows you whole. And through it all, the question lingers: what exactly are you fighting for? Is it faith? Glory? Survival? Or just the hope that someday, somehow, this holy war will end, and you can go home? You glimpse Jerusalem again, not as a city, but as a ghost hovering at the edge of your mind. Saladin still holds it. And despite all the bloodshed, no one has taken it back. The war grinds on, but the real prize remains just out of reach. You wake to the sound of bells. Not church bells, not victory bells, just the tinny, cracked clang of someone using a dented helmet to summon the morning watch. Your legs ache, your fingers are swollen, and there's a knot in your back that feels older than Jerusalem itself. Welcome to the third year of the Third Crusade. You've marched from Acre to Jaffa and back again, tracing circles in a land that keeps resisting your every step. The summer heat is unforgiving. The winters are damp and bone-deep cold. And through it all, Jerusalem stays just over the next hill, always mentioned, never reached. Mainstream fact: although the Crusaders captured key coastal cities like Acre and Jaffa, the Third Crusade ultimately failed to retake Jerusalem. The Holy City remained in Muslim hands throughout the campaign. Richard the Lionheart is still here, still fighting, but he's more a force of will than flesh now. His illnesses come and go. 1 week he rides at the front of the line, bellowing battle cries and cutting down foes like he's made of iron. The next, he's slumped under a canopy, pale as parchment, dictating letters to England with a voice like gravel. You never quite know which version of him you'll get. That makes him a lot like this war. The plan, if anyone can still call it that, is to pressure Saladin until he's desperate enough to negotiate. But Saladin, to his credit, plays the long game. His troops strike from the shadows, hit supply lines, vanish into the hills. And always, they melt away before you can retaliate. There's one night near the fortress of Ascalon that stays with you. The moon is huge, like a ghostly coin in the sky, and you're posted near the edge of camp, half listening to the distant ululation of drums and pipes. Some say Saladin's men use the music to unnerve crusaders. Others say it's a kind of prayer, praise sung before battle. You don't care what it means. It makes the hair on your arms stand up. And then there's the internal politics. Oh boy. At this point, you can't tell what's worse, fighting Saladin or watching your fellow crusaders claw each other to pieces over prestige and property. There are German knights who still blame Richard for Emperor Frederick Barbarossa's death, never mind that the poor man drowned in a river before he even made it to Acre. Then there are the French nobles, who spend more time gossiping about who deserves command than actually commanding. Fringe tidbit, after Frederick's death, his body was pickled and transported in barrels of vinegar to preserve it for burial in the Holy Land, a process that didn't go particularly well, to put it mildly. And don't forget the Templars and Hospitallers, those military orders with their pristine armor and very different interpretations of God's will. They bicker constantly about strategy, theology, and who gets the bigger tent. Richard tries to hold it all together, but you can see the strain in his eyes. He's not just fighting Saladin. He's fighting boredom, betrayal, and British barons breathing down his neck from across the sea. Historians still argue whether Richard truly cared about reclaiming Jerusalem or just about preserving his reputation. One morning, there's a strange peace in the camp. No alarms. No arrows. Just a quiet messenger from Saladin's court. He brings fruit, letters, and a tentative proposal, a truce. You sit in stunned silence as word spreads through the ranks. Could it be? Is it finally over? The negotiations drag on for weeks. You hear whispers of secret meetings. Jaffa becomes neutral ground. Richard and Saladin never meet face to face, but they exchange gifts, falcons, horses, even snow shipped from Mount Lebanon packed in straw. That's how surreal things have become. You're watching kings play chess with snow and silver while your boots fall apart. Eventually, an agreement is reached. The Treaty of Jaffa, 1192. Jerusalem will remain under Muslim control. But Christian pilgrims may visit freely. The Crusade estates along the coast are reaffirmed. And Richard? He'll return to Europe. You should feel something, relief, maybe. Or victory. Or at least closure. Instead, you feel numb. You weren't even allowed to approach Jerusalem. Not really. You just danced around it for years, a moth chasing a lantern it could never quite touch. There's no final charge. No moment where the holy city's gates open to your exhausted army. No pope standing with outstretched arms saying, "Well done, my child." Just the sound of Richard boarding a ship, his armor clanking like a farewell bell. And you? You stay behind. Someone has to guard the fragile territories that remain. Someone has to keep the peace between Crusader princes who hate each other more than they ever hated Saladin. The Holy Land feels less holy than ever. More like a chessboard where someone knocked over the king and called it a draw. You think of all the men who died for this, not just knights and kings, but farmers, merchants, cooks, squires, and torchbearers. The ones buried in shallow graves or left where they fell, bones picked clean by vultures and time. You wonder what they'd think of the treaty. Of that peace. You pack your gear. Your sword is dulled. Your sandals are torn. Your faith, if you're honest, is barely holding on. But you survived. And out here, that's something. Isn't it? You return to the coast under a sky that looks too wide, too empty. The Treaty of Jaffa has been signed, but don't let the word peace fool you, it's a ceasefire, not a lullaby. You're not marching anymore, at least not for now. But you're not going home either. You're part of the skeleton crew left behind to babysit the Crusade estates, thin ribbons of territory hugging the shoreline like a desperate grip on a crumbling cliff. Richard the Lionheart is gone. Back to England, or at least trying. Spoiler alert, he gets shipwrecked, imprisoned by the Duke of Austria, and ransomed back to his throne like a shiny piece in a very expensive board game. Mainstream fact, after leaving the Holy Land in 1192, Richard was captured near Vienna by Duke Leopold V, whom he had insulted during the Crusade. His ransom was one of the largest ever demanded for a monarch. You're not thinking about that. You're thinking about your tent, and how the canvas never quite stops leaking. About the supplies that arrive late. About the way your commander stares at maps as if they might magically sprout reinforcements if he squints hard enough. There's no glory here. Just maintenance. You're posted near Caesarea, one of the many cities along the coast fortified by crusaders. You dig trenches, patrol narrow walls, and wait for word of new recruits who never seem to come. Food is rationed again. You eat mostly lentils and bread baked so hard you could crack a helmet with it. Sometimes, there's dried fish. Sometimes, someone steals the dried fish. A knight is caught cheating at dice and thrown into the sea. Or maybe he jumped. Either way, he's not coming back. And the locals? They haven't forgotten who you are. Some tolerate your presence, especially the Christian merchants who profit from your guard duty. But most, especially Muslims and Eastern Orthodox families, see you as foreign squatters, war-drenched shadows who can't take a hint. You try to be respectful. You smile at shopkeepers. You help patch a roof after a storm. But one evening, a little girl throws a stone at your back and yells a word you don't understand. Her father doesn't stop her. It's hard to blame them. Fringe tidbit, some Crusader settlements included Latin Christians, Syrian Christians, Jews, and Muslims living in tense but functioning arrangements. However, resentment often simmered beneath the surface, especially after waves of violence and conquest. And you? You're tired. Not just need a nap, tired, but soul tired. You've slept beside corpses, marched through swamps, dodged arrows, and helped bury more friends than you can name. You dream of green hills and songs by a hearth, but when you wake, all you hear is the wind against stone. You start to wonder, what if this is your life now? Historians still argue whether Crusader veterans integrated into local life or remained psychologically stuck in a wartime mindset. You suspect it's a bit of both. One day, a group of monks arrives from the west. They say they're here to rebuild a church and help administer the truce. One wears sandals made of rope, and you can see his blisters through the twine. He asks if you've been to Jerusalem. You shake your head. He asks if you believe it was worth it. You say nothing. The days blend together. You sharpen your blade out of habit, not hope. You hear rumors of another crusade brewing back in Europe, whispers of a fourth wave that will try to finish what Richard started. You laugh too hard when someone mentions it. The silence afterward is awkward. One of your comrades, a German named Otto, keeps a diary carved into softwood with a knife. It's mostly sketches, ships, cities, birds he misses from home. One morning, you find his bunk empty. His diary is still there. The last drawing is a door. No one asks where he went. You start carving things too, not words, just shapes. Circles. Mountains. A goat with 3 legs. You're losing your grip on time. On what mattered. On who you were. You try to pray, but the words feel hollow. You try to write home, but your hands won't stop shaking. Then, one morning, a bird lands near your boots. A hoopoe, small and striped, head tilting sideways as if studying your face. You think, absurdly, that it might be a sign. You follow the bird for a bit, across the rocks and up toward the cliffs. And for the first time in months, you cry. No one sees you. And that's a blessing. Because crying doesn't belong to knights, or warriors, or defenders of the faith. It belongs to human beings, ones who didn't sign up for this endless purgatory. Back at camp, someone's playing a flute. Badly. You sit down in the dust. And for a moment, you just breathe. Maybe that's all you can do. Maybe that's enough. You get your orders on a Wednesday, at least, someone thinks it's a Wednesday. Calendars have become more a matter of faith than fact out here. But the orders are clear, you're being transferred inland. Not for a battle, not for glory, those days are done, but to escort a small caravan of supplies and clerics to a mountain monastery that somehow survived the past few decades of chaos. You don't ask questions. You pack your gear, check your sword, and try not to let your face show the weight of every mile still ahead. The group is a strange bunch. 2 monks who barely speak above a whisper. A cook who carries his entire kitchen on the back of a donkey. And 3 young boys, novices, apparently, sent to study in the Holy Land. They treat you like a storybook character. One of them even tries to polish your helmet. You don't have the heart to stop him. The path inland is familiar and foreign. You've passed these hills before, marched them in heavy armor with banners fluttering and trumpets blaring. Now you walk quietly, avoiding the old roads. The monks say it's safer this way. You know what they mean: bandits, raiders, deserters, and the occasional rogue knight who didn't take the Treaty of Jaffa as a personal memo. Mainstream fact: after each major crusade, many armed men, especially landless younger sons or mercenaries, lingered in the Levant, often turning to banditry or acting as freelance enforcers for local powers. You keep your hand near your sword, but the only real danger for the first few days is boredom. The hills roll on and on, olive trees knotted like old hands, stones poking up from the soil like broken teeth. Then one night, it changes. You camp near a dried riverbed. The stars are so clear it feels like the sky has opened. You even catch yourself relaxing for a moment, staring upward as if you might float. And then you hear it. A scream, not a human one. Animal. High-pitched, torn in half by something fast. You're on your feet before your brain catches up. The donkey is gone. You find its lead trailing into the dark, still tied to a snapped stake. There's blood. And silence. Fringe tidbit: jackals, hyenas, and even lions once roamed parts of the Levant. Crusade-era accounts mention nighttime attacks on camps, though many details blur between truth and terrifying campfire tales. The next morning, the cook is gone too. No struggle, just an empty bedroll and his pot abandoned in the ashes. The monks say nothing. The boys huddle closer to you. You start walking faster. The monastery appears like a hallucination, tucked into the cliffs, ancient and crumbling, but still standing. A bell tolls as you approach. Or maybe it's just the wind slapping a loose iron plate. Inside, you meet Brother Elias. He's the color of parchment and built like a broomstick. He tells you, in a voice like falling sand, that the monastery has stood since before the Crusades began. Maybe since before Rome fell. You wonder if he says that to everyone, or just to people who look like they're unraveling. The monks take in the boys, the other cleric, even the jittery one with the nosebleeds. But you? You're an outsider. You get a cot in the stable and a polite request not to disturb the silence. Fair enough. You stay a few days. The mountains are dry and cold. There's no music, just wind and the occasional hymn drifting through cracks in the stone. You sleep deeply for the first time in a while. But the dreams aren't kind. You see Acre burning again. You see a boy you couldn't save. You see Richard, laughing, shouting, bleeding, and then turning to smoke. You wake with clenched fists and no memory of falling asleep. The monastery gives you bread, olives, and a water skin. They offer a blessing for your travels. One of the boys hugs you. The monks frown. And then you're gone again, back toward the coast, alone. There's a spot halfway down the trail where you stop and look out over the plains. You can see the shimmer of the sea. You can almost smell the salt. You think about the ships that wait there. The ones that will sail for Europe in the spring. You wonder if you'll be on one. Historians still argue whether returning crusaders were welcomed as heroes or regarded as burdens. Many brought back scars, some visible, most not, and found their old homes changed beyond recognition. You pass a burnt-out village on your way back. You don't know who burned it. Crusaders? Saracens? Locals avenging an old wrong? Does it matter? You don't stop. You don't search. You walk past the collapsed houses and overgrown fields like a ghost passing through a painting. Back at the outpost, nothing has changed. The food is still terrible. The guards still argue over card games. Someone swears they saw a comet last night. You unpack your gear. You sit down. You sharpen your blade out of habit. And you think, this isn't over. Not really. The truce is fragile. The politics back in Europe are messy. You hear whispers of a fourth crusade already forming. People still dream of Jerusalem. And some dreams refuse to die, no matter how much blood they cost. But you? You've stopped dreaming. You just wait. You're not surprised when the Fourth Crusade finally arrives, not in the Holy Land, of course, but in the letters, the gossip, the sudden shift in posture from your commanding officer. Everyone starts moving a little faster, eyes sharper, as if they've remembered they're part of something bigger than a coastal fort with moldy bread. But you? You just watch. You know better. See, word trickles in that the next crusade isn't aiming for Jerusalem at all. It's gotten sidetracked. And by sidetracked, we mean diverted, bribed, manipulated, and ultimately convinced to sack Constantinople instead of marching on the Holy City. Mainstream fact: in 1204, the Fourth Crusade famously veered off course and captured Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, a Christian city. It remains one of the most controversial episodes in crusading history. You hear the rumors like broken puzzle pieces. Something about unpaid debts. Something about Venetian ships and a blind doge named Enrico Dandolo who played the Crusaders like a pipe organ. Something about princes vying for thrones and relics looted like candy from a broken pinata. You want to laugh, but there's no joy in it. Just the dry ache of déjà vu. You sit on the same rock you always do when the sun dips low, the sea turns to steel, and the fort falls quiet except for the clinking of armor and the distant coughing of someone who should have died weeks ago. Someone tells a joke about relics, how the French are now selling enough splinters of the true cross to build an entire ark. No one laughs. Not really. Fringe tidbit: after the sack of Constantinople, relics and treasures flooded Western Europe. Cathedrals proudly displayed supposed fingers of saints and drops of Christ's blood, many of which were likely fake or stolen from Byzantine churches. You write a letter home, knowing it might never be delivered. You mention none of this. Instead, you write about the weather, a fig tree you saw blooming early, and a cat that's taken up residence in the mess tent. You try to keep it light. You lie, a little. Maybe more than a little. Because how do you explain that your war, your crusade, was supposed to be for heaven, and somehow wound up delivering hell to Christians, Muslims, and everyone in between? Historians still argue whether the Fourth Crusade was a tragic accident, a calculated betrayal, or simply the inevitable outcome of too many egos and too little gold. You don't need to argue. You've seen how these things unravel. Back at the fort, a new commander arrives. Young. Polished. Smells like soap and optimism. He gathers everyone and gives a speech about restoring faith and renewed purpose. You stop listening halfway through and count how many people are checking their boots instead of his face. That night, a storm blows in. The kind with sideways rain and wind that wails like a banshee. You sleep in your armor. Just in case. And in the morning, you find half the storage hut collapsed and the cat very, very offended. Things settle back into their rhythm, which is to say, and nothing happens for a while. Until something does. A caravan is ambushed near Jaffa. Survivors stumble in, wild-eyed, speaking of arrows in the dark and riders who vanished like smoke. No flags. No messages. Just death. Your orders come the next day. Retaliatory strike, they call it. Localized show of strength. You don't argue. You sharpen your blade. You polish your helm. You check the tightness of every strap. But something feels wrong. Not with the mission. With you. You don't want this anymore. Not the blood, not the heat, not the adrenaline spike followed by the guilt that lingers like a hangover you can't shake. You tell your commander you're unwell. He squints at you, confused. Like you've spoken a dialect he never learned. You were in Acre, he says. You nod. He waves you off, like that alone justifies everything you'll ever be ordered to do. And maybe, for him, it does. So you go. Again. You ride out with a dozen others, some veterans like you, others fresh from Europe with bright eyes and misplaced faith. The land is familiar, treacherous in places. You avoid the ravines. You keep to high ground. You listen for the wind and what it might be hiding. You find the village. Or what's left of it. Burned. Looted. Animals slaughtered. People gone. It's unclear if this is the work of those raiders, or if your side beat them to it. Someone suggests torching the nearby groves as a warning. You suggest silence. The commander overrules you. By nightfall, the trees are burning. You watch the flames curl upward like fingers reaching for a god that no longer answers. One of the young knights asks you if this is what crusading is always like. You tell him no. Then you pause. Then you say, only on the good days. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't ask more questions. You return to the fort. No one greets you. No one asks for a report. Life continues. The monks chant their prayers. The guards play dice. The sea whispers secrets to the rocks that no one wants to understand. You think about Jerusalem. Not the city. The idea of it. The perfect, golden prize that justified 1,000 sins. That never quite looked the way people imagined when they finally saw it. That seemed always just out of reach. And now? It's quieter in your head. You don't need to reach it anymore. Maybe you never did. One morning you wake up to the sound of ships. Not trumpets, not battle cries, just creaking wood and seabirds squabbling over scraps. You walk to the edge of the bluff and there they are, bobbing just off the coast. 3 galleys, red sails trimmed in gold. Venetian design. Newer than anything you've seen in months. They're not here for a crusade. That much is obvious. They're merchants, or worse, recruiters. And yes, before noon, a man in a fur-trimmed doublet is stomping up the main causeway, grinning like he owns every stone under his feet. He gathers the men and starts his pitch. Not about Jerusalem, not even about Christ. He talks about Constantinople, its golden towers, its fallen splendor, and how there's still treasure to be found if you're quick, clever, and cruel enough to take it. Mainstream fact, after the infamous sack of Constantinople in 1204, the city and its surrounding regions became fragmented and vulnerable. Mercenaries and ex-crusaders often stayed behind to profit off the instability. You lean against a wall, arms crossed. The merchant's voice drones on, something about relics, something about imperial favors, something about land. You've heard it all before. The others? They're hooked. You can see it in their eyes. The hunger. Not for holiness, not anymore. For something shinier. Revenge, maybe. Or simply relevance. That night, you sit with a few of the older men. You pass around a skin of sour wine and take turns telling lies about better days. One guy claims he saw the Virgin Mary during the siege of Acre. Another says he rode beside Baldwin before the leprosy took his face. You? You stay quiet. The merchant sails away with 30 new recruits. You recognize several of them. You help none of them pack. You're asked, once, if you want to go too. You say no. Without smiling. It rains that night, and you stand in it until your boots fill with water. It feels like penance. Or maybe just habit. You start wandering the edges of the outpost again. The places no one goes anymore. Where the old siege towers are half swallowed by vines. Where helmets rust like forgotten fruit in overgrown ditches. You find a broken standard beneath a fig tree. The cross is cracked, but still there. You don't take it. You leave it leaning against the trunk like an offering. Fringe tidbit: some Crusader outposts kept their banners flying years after their kingdoms fell, tended by a handful of soldiers who either didn't know or didn't care that the war had ended. One afternoon, a Saracen trader rides into the camp under a white flag. He's carrying spices, dried dates, and a little carved elephant made of ivory. You're stunned anyone's still willing to do business here. He speaks in rough French. You reply in worse Arabic. Somehow, it works. He tells you what's happening across the inland hills. About shifting alliances. About small Muslim emirates swallowing up territory abandoned by Crusader states. About peace that comes in bursts, like rainfall on dry stone. You ask him if Jerusalem is calm. He nods. Says, calmer than you. Touché. Historians still argue whether the later Crusades served any purpose at all, or if they were simply inertia made violent, habitual warfare dressed up in old slogans. But on the ground, most people stopped pretending to care long before the diplomats did. You find yourself walking farther from camp each day. Out past the burial mounds. Past the shepherd trails. Sometimes you follow the coastline for hours, just listening to the waves and trying not to remember the things you've seen. Once, you spot a cluster of children playing in the ruins of an old villa. One holds a stick like a sword. Another wears a pot like a helmet. They chase each other through the dust, laughing, oblivious to what those stones once witnessed. You don't interrupt. You don't wave. You just watch. And for a moment, your chest feels hollow and heavy all at once. When you return, you find a letter waiting. The seal is faded. The script is careful but shaky. It's from home. Your younger brother is dead. A fever. Your father too, not long after. Your sister married. Your name barely remembered. You read it twice. Then you burn it. No one asks what it said. You don't offer. You stop polishing your armor. You stop keeping your sword within arm's reach at night. You start sketching things in the dirt with a stick, ships, mostly. And a cabin with smoke coming from the chimney. And trees that look like the ones near your childhood river. One of the younger knights finds your drawings and asks if they're maps. You say yes. Let him think that. You hear, a week later, that a ship is leaving for Sicily before the summer heat peaks. Not a war galley. Just a merchant vessel willing to trade passage for labor. You consider it. For days. And then, one morning, you pack your things. Not the armor. Not the sword. Just your clothes. Your knife. A pouch of dried dates you bought from the Saracen trader. And a small wooden rosary missing 3 beads. You leave the outpost before dawn. No one stops you. You pass the fig tree one more time. The banner is gone. Maybe the wind took it. Maybe someone else did. You don't look back. Not even once. The ship is smaller than you imagined, and smells worse. Salt, fish, and the unmistakable sourness of old wood soaked in too many seasons of too many sailors. You sign on as a deckhand, which really means you tie knots you barely understand and carry things no one else wants to lift. No one asks where you've been or what you've seen. No one cares. You like that. It's better this way. The sea air is colder than it should be for June. Your skin, weathered and scarred, welcomes the sting. You find yourself standing at the prow more often than not, staring at the horizon like it owes you an apology. You pass Cyprus. Then roads. Then a string of nameless rocks where birds wheel above you and dolphins flicker like ghosts just beneath the waves. Mainstream fact: many former Crusaders returned to Europe not as celebrated heroes but as broken men, quiet, haunted, and unwilling to speak of what they'd witnessed. Some simply disappeared into monastic life or rural obscurity, lost in a world that had moved on without them. You stop dreaming about Acre. You start dreaming about trees. Green ones. Not palm trees or olive groves, but thick forests where moss clings to bark and leaves whisper like lullabies. One sailor jokes that you have the look of a monk. You nod. He laughs, thinking you misunderstood. You didn't. You reach Sicily after nearly 2 weeks of open water. The dock creaks beneath your boots and the town rises behind it like a promise half kept. You step off the boat. You do not look back. You find a small monastery in the hills, surrounded by lemon trees and silence. The abbot is old, blind in one eye, and has a voice like paper being folded. He lets you stay. You don't tell him who you were. Just who you are now, a man who's tired of killing and wants to mend things. Roofs, mostly. Fences. Maybe his own heart, in time. Fringe tidbit: some European monasteries quietly sheltered returning crusaders under assumed identities, allowing them to atone without the shame of failure or the weight of past violence. You settle into a rhythm. Chores. Prayer. Sleep. You speak little. You smile even less. But the silence doesn't feel empty. Not anymore. You tend the garden. The soil is soft, black, forgiving. Carrots grow in crooked rows. Tomatoes burst with color. One day, a fox steals into the yard, snatches a hen, and disappears before you can throw a stone. You don't mind. That night, over stew, the abbot says something about divine balance. You nod like you understand. Maybe you do. You begin writing again. Not letters. Not journals. Just thoughts, scratched into scraps of parchment. Fragments of prayers. Phrases that come to you in sleep and vanish by dawn unless you trap them with ink. You keep them in a box beneath your cot. You never show them to anyone. Historians still argue whether the Crusades were ever truly about faith, or if they were simply cloaked in it, a convenient banner beneath which greed, power, and politics marched hand in hand. You no longer argue with anyone. You've seen what people will do with a cause, and what they'll become once the cause is over. One morning, you wake to birdsong and realize you haven't dreamed of blood in weeks. You walk down to the river with a pail and watch the water curl around your boots. It's clean. Cold. Alive in a way that cities and sieges never are. You think about all the things you once believed. You think about how far you've come, not just in miles, but in understanding. And you know, now, that if you could go back, if you could warn that eager, armored version of yourself, wide-eyed and aching for purpose, you'd tell him to stay. To pick up a plough instead of a sword. To fall in love with the land, not the glory. To listen to old monks and wiser women. To find the holy not in conquest, but in quiet. The bells ring for prayer. You close your eyes. And breathe. And now, as the final echoes of your journey fade into the hush of distant waves and rustling olive branches, you find yourself, finally, at peace. The clatter of swords has long since quieted, the banners have long since fallen, and the face in the mirror bears the lines of memory, not of war. Let the memories drift. Let the weight roll off your shoulders like a cloak too heavy to carry. You've walked through deserts, sailed over storm-laced seas, stood in cities on fire and in chapels where the candles still burn without question. You've seen the best and worst of what people become when they think God is on their side. But now, there is only stillness. A soft breeze stirring the lemon trees. The rhythmic creak of wood as the abbey settles into night. And above, a sky brushed with stars that have watched it all unfold without judgment, without end. You are not who you were. You are quieter now. softer, more real. If your hands tremble, it's from the cold spring water. If your chest tightens, it's from the scent of rosemary crushed beneath your steps, not the call to arms. So let yourself rest. Let yourself be small and whole and human again. Because after everything, after the fever of zeal and the fire of regret, you are still here. And that, maybe more than anything, is the miracle. Now close your eyes and let the soft breath of this story linger just a little longer. Drift gently, quietly, into dreams that are yours alone. No banners. No battle cries. Just the sound of wind through leaves. And the hush of a world finally at peace.